We'll move on, Keith, and we can talk about Newcastle United, because we know PIF spoke publicly about buying new clubs, sort of jetting out to Brazil, looking at takeover opportunities. What are your thoughts for that and for Newcastle specifically?
Yeah, look, when they first took over Newcastle, that was mooted straight away, and I paid a lot of attention to that, and I actually spoke to some people at Newcastle about this. It's difficult to understand where they're going. They've taken some time to make up their mind. At one time, there was even talk of them buying the whole of 777 in terms of that multi-club organisation from 777, not the companies, but I should add, obviously. But they wanted to buy a ready pre-packaged multi-club group, which made sense. I think luckily for them, they didn't go through with it, although the collection of clubs with the proper care and attention could have been quite powerful. Newcastle have tended not to look at working with any other clubs. They're going to be led by the PIF, obviously, in this sort of area. The PIF have been linked with major Italian clubs. They've been linked with lots of other different opportunities, but nothing's ever happened. And they've been very careful not to really align themselves. There has been talk about Brazil and different things coming through. But to me, it still seems to be they're going through a learning curve about what is happening around an MCO. And I wouldn't put it past them, as I say, to rather than do it one by one, to actually look at buying a pre-packaged multi-club group from somebody else. And that's one interesting direction that hasn't been done yet. So no longer is it owners acquiring a club, then adding one by one. They're now, we'll buy a club, then we'll add 6 or 7 in one transaction. That would be fascinating to see how that goes. But one of the key links that they'll be looking to do is how would that MCO also impact the Saudi Premier League? And what benefit would it mean? So, for instance, if the PIF did start acquiring, or they bought a pre-packaged MCO, or they started adding 1, 2, 3 clubs together, Newcastle may not be the big beneficiary of that. It may be the Saudi Premier League or some of the Saudi clubs that they own. So we've got to see how that would shape up. It's an interesting question as to what does a Saudi Premier League club need in terms of an MCO, or is it going to be all about creating homegrown talent in Saudi right now? And in which case an MCO may not make sense unless they can farm players out to them. It's an interesting situation. I would think the PIF, though, at some stage will want to expand into more of a global base. But as I say, it's what does it bring to their Saudi clubs they own is the question that we should be asking, rather than what does it bring for Newcastle.
If we backtrack then, Keith, and take that first point, because that's really interesting, do we expect then if they do sort of go for, say, a pre-packaged MCO deal, could that then become sort of the norm within football clubs and ownership, that actually instead of going one by one like you discussed, this actually could become regular for clubs to actually go and buy multiple clubs at once, or a package at once?
Yeah, look, I don't think it'll become common, but I think certainly the big players at the top can do it. I think there's over about 60 different multi-club organisations now. So, it is becoming reasonably common. And it does seem that the authorities, FIFA, UEFA, etc., are giving the nod to the MCO in some way. I mean, they'll even be able to come to an accommodation around how Man City and Girona could actually play in European competitions. So it does seem that previously the big hurdle was not being able to play in similar competitions is being removed. So it's a bit of a nod. Now, if I was cynical, I would say, isn't that strange how FIFA is starting to look more kindly on MCOs when Saudi Aramco has just put in 100 million into FIFA, and the World Cup's going to be held there in 34, and all of a sudden, perhaps this is the strategy that the Saudis have asked for, and suddenly the rules are being bent. That would be very cynical, and I'm not saying that's the case, but nevertheless, it does beg that question. So the key issue, I think, will be that MCOs are going to start to flourish. If they're done correctly, like everything in football, you've got to have proper football people in there as well to do it. And importantly, crucially to me, an MCO is that those people, each of those clubs, have got to get on, and they've got to respect each other and talk frequently. You can't have them in isolation and have the owner try and bang heads together. There's got to be a genuine collaboration in an MCO. There's got to be a clear definition of the goals that each club has got to go to and what they're trying to achieve. And then what is that, in the Venn diagram, what is that 10, 20% overlap with the other clubs where they can benefit each other? If it's not done properly and thought through strategically, all you're going to do is have a collection of clubs that may all be losing money. So you've got to think this through. It's certainly a new way forward. I think it will go forward, and I think you're right that there will be eventually selling blocks of clubs together will become something that we'll start to see in the next 4 or 5 years.
And Keith, you sort of to pick up on the following point that you sort of mentioned in there, does that then mean, do you think, that PIF are viewing Newcastle as a stepping stone, not necessarily in Europe, but actually that their direct focus will be on, their Saudi clubs that they own? So actually they will use Newcastle effectively to pull talent to the Saudi Pro League. Is that your feeling potentially for them?
I think that where it could end up being, I mean, look, what seems to be happening in Saudi is that after the PIF bought the first 4 clubs last year and really, went to town, as we all know, on stocking them with great players, I think we may see them this time go down to another 4 clubs. And so you end up with 8 clubs that are being, given resources effectively. And gradually they'll get the whole league. So they have 12 clubs or 16 clubs that are really, stocked with quality players. And the league itself is now, getting more stable in the next 3 or 4 years. So that's where I think it's going to go. And if that's the case, then Newcastle may well become secondary. I think Newcastle for them has been a fantastic learning curve in terms of understanding about football at club level. I think the chairman there, Yasser, has learned a lot about how football operates and how it's worked at club level. But there's no doubt the Saudis have much bigger situations. As I mentioned, FIFA, they've spent a lot of time working with Infantino and getting to understand FIFA and learning how those strings are pulled within FIFA. They've got the 34 World Cup to host. And so it'll be very interesting to watch announcements coming out now about new stadiums that are going to be built and new facilities and what that will mean for clubs within the Saudi Premier League. I mean, it really is watch this space. There's going to be some amazing developments coming up, and it'll need to start building those new stadia reasonably soon. I mean, 34 is still 10 years away, but still within the next few years, some plans are going to have to be drawn up and start to be talked about. So we're going to see a big shift in that league towards quality, and I think Newcastle will, as I say, will end up not necessarily being the focus of PIF, which they've been for a period of time, but they'll also be a valued member of a very important group of clubs.
And Keith, to sort of look at the flip side of that, what are the biggest concerns for multi-club ownership potentially, and what are your biggest worries of where football could go with MCOs?
But it's when they get exploited and they're just being used as an end for the bigger club. So if it's a genuine win-win for everybody that's in the group, and there are benefits for those at the bottom of the pyramid as well as the halo club at the top, that's okay. But when it's top down only, that's the big issue. And as I say, there's got to be personal cohesiveness between all the operators within the club, the sporting directors, the managers, and the owners have got to be sure that they instill a culture of working together, of innovation, and they've got to try and put best practice from each of those clubs together. And it isn't just about adding numbers and financial engineering to be able to shift players and transfers and loans and different things. They've got to do it genuinely for the football benefit of each of the members of the MCO. If those things don't happen, then it can just be that the weakest within the group get exploited, and I don't want to see that happen.